Hey everyone. So this video is not a joke. There's no punchline here. It's not funny. I just got back from the shops and there was an altercation. When I walked into the shops, there was a scuffle. People were fighting. There was a guy that had a kid in, not a teenager, 15-year-old, and he's got him in sort of, a headlock. He's got his arms so he can't strike or hit him. He's trying to get the kid outside of the shop. I'm walking into the shop. I see that. I naturally assume, well, it must be this guy's kid. The kid's throwing a tantrum, leaving the shop. So I walk through and I go to order my coffee and I hear crashing and clattering and shouting. So I walk back around the corner and now this teenager is picking up ceramic dishes from the restaurants that are nearby and throwing it at people, and they're smashing and crashing everywhere. And so I'm sitting and waiting to see what's happening. I'm not sure if the guy's parent is here, but I'm watching the situation to see what happens. It turns out I don't know where this kid's parents are. And he's getting violent and he's throwing things at people. And some people are filming it with their camera. Some people are just gathering from a distance to watch what's happening with this teenager. The teenager's screaming. I can't discern what he's saying. So I worked for years and years in disability services. I could tell within seconds this kid has specialized needs, and there's a very specific way that you deal with people with specialized needs. You have to understand the situation they are in, the headspace they are in, and you have to know that there are certain things that they will do once they've entered a certain mental state. Then you have to change the way that you respond. And sometimes you do have to physically just stop them, because if you don't, they will hurt someone. They will hurt someone very badly. And so I was watching the situation. I wasn't going to get involved. I wasn't going to step in, but I thought there's a chance that someone could get hurt, because I thought, what if the guy that is trying to push this kid outside, what if that's not his parent? What if it's a stranger? And it turned out it was someone else. And apparently this teenager had been causing problems in the shop. It became physical. And now this kid is striking out, hitting people. And I'm watching from a distance. I see him go around the corner. He comes back and now he's holding a screwdriver. And now he's screaming, he's looking around, he's trying to stab people. And so that's when I stepped in and I picked up a chair and I was just holding it and I'm watching him approaching people, and I'm getting in between him and people, and I've got the chair and I'm getting ready to, once he tries to strike, then I'll put the chair between the kid and the person and he won't be able to reach anyone. That's outranging him, but I'm not aggressing. And I'm watching him and I'm holding on to the chair. I'm saying, hey, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's all right. It's all right. He's screaming and he's trying to stab people. And now I've got the chair and I'm just corralling him outside. And I'm calmly saying, look, it's going to be okay. We're corralling him outside. Meanwhile, bystanders are coming up to gawk at him and they're blocking the entrance where I'm trying to get this kid out the door. We need to get this kid out of the shop where he can get some fresh air, get away from people, and calm him down. And so now people are blocking the exit. I'm saying, can you guys please leave? They're not listening. They want to see what's going on, why this kid's screaming at the top of his lung. It's starting to work out. He's trying to swing out with a screwdriver. And I've got the chair up and I'm corralling him back and I'm pushing him away from people he's trying to stab with the screwdriver. And then some genius comes up to me and then pushes me, takes the chair to my hand. He's trying to say, hey, cut it out, man. You're going to make him hate you. And this guy is not intelligent. Like, you can tell someone's depth of intelligence pretty quickly. And the guy, now I'm having to fight two people with mental issues, because now he's mad at me and he's pushing me. And I'm the one that's stopping this kid from stabbing people. I'm the only one that's stopping this kid from stabbing people. And now this moron that thinks that he's hot shit because he's this big overweight dude, thinks that he's tough and strong and he knows better. And meanwhile, he's pushing me. He's saying, hey, you're going to make that kid, you're making him hate you. Look what you're doing. Look what you're doing. He's taking my chair away. I'm using the chair to stop this kid from stabbing people with a screwdriver. So now I'm fighting off two people. And eventually, we get this kid outside and I have to walk away from this dude. I'm getting ticked off by this moron that's making the situation worse. I'm here to de-escalate it. Meanwhile, this moron thinks that he knows better, that he's smarter. I've worked in disability services for years. I've trained for this. So I know when to change your approach. I know when to take certain actions, and I know how to de-escalate and get people to calm down. And this moron thinks he's tough shit. So now I'm dealing with these two people. We finally get the kid outside. We get the doors locked. We're cleaning up. There's stuff everywhere. And oh man, I'm so irritated with this guy, and I'm just keeping my mouth shut because it could have gotten way worse. If he had stepped in sooner and basically just forced his way between me and the kid, then someone would have been stabbed. And this moron thinks, oh, I'm big, I'm tough. Ooh. Anyway, that was my morning. This is not a joke. This isn't a punchline thing. So anyway, I got to get back to work. I'm going to get back to game development. Just going to enjoy my coffee. And yeah, I'll make more fun videos. People want me to take a look at the Nintendo stuff. I'll be doing that, but I'm not irritated at the kid that had the issues. I'm irritated about the moron that thinks that he knew better and that reckoned that he knew better than everyone else and he could de-escalate when he was making things worse. Sounds like an analogy for the games industry, isn't it? It's very, very fitting for the situation. Anyway, have a good day. That's my afternoon.
The Tesla attack, I've got it.
Well, if you're listening to some of these numbers, 10%, 20%, 25%, and you're trying to get your head around exactly what's happened, well, hopefully this might help. So yesterday was Liberation Day. Donald Trump announced a raft of measures on the US's trading partners. These blue bars show where we were before, what the state of tariffs were for US's trading partners. You can see he's already imposed tariffs on Mexico, on Canada, as well as on China. Some of those were rolled over from Trump's first presidency. And then he implemented this 10% baseline tariff on all exports, on all imports coming into the US, irrespective of where they're coming from. And you can see that includes the UK. So the UK has been hit with that 10% baseline tariff. In fact, actually here, Canada and Mexico got some exemptions from that 10% tariff, but they've still been hit with that 25% tariff on a large chunk of their goods. So that's the baseline tariff, but there was more. Donald Trump said he wanted to look into the US's trading relationship with individual countries and impose something he called a reciprocal tariff, effectively looking at the tariffs those countries impose, saying if you do it to us, we're going to do it to you, but also looking at other impediments to trade. So, for example, regulations that might block US exports. And when we tot all of that up, and you can see that they're stacking, by the way, so that these tariffs sit on top of each one. And then suddenly, when those reciprocal tariffs are applied, well, those bars shoot up, particularly painful, as you can see, for countries like China, which has been hit with a 34% reciprocal tariff, but that sits on top of all the other tariffs, meaning actually, accumulatively, the tariff on China is over 50%, and that is massive, really significant. And other countries as well. So Vietnam, a Southeast Asian exporting powerhouse, has been hit with that 46% reciprocal tariff, taking the total tariff closer to 60%. Now, you might be looking at the UK over there thinking, well, it seems like we've got off pretty lightly. We've only been hit with the 10% baseline tariff. We haven't had any additional reciprocal tariffs added on. And Trump, when he was calculating all of this, as I said, he was saying that he was looking at tariffs that other countries impose onto US imports, but also looking at other non-tariff barriers. But actually, if we dig into how they figured all of this out. And bear in mind, there was some head-scratching among economists when these announcements were being made. How has he come up with these figures? And it looks like he's less interested in the tariffs that those countries impose and more interested in just the cold numbers of the deficit. So look at this. China, the US has a big deficit with China. It means China is sending more stuff to the US than it receives from the US, and EU as well. It's got considerable deficit with the EU. And it looks like what he's done is, well, he's taken those countries' trade surpluses with the US. He's divided it by their total exports to the US, divided that number by 2, and come up with the reciprocal tariff. And let's see that in action. So this is the China example. You can see there, he's taken China's surplus with the US, divided it by their exports, and divided that number by 2, and that's where that 34% number has come from, which begs the question, actually, if you look at the UK, well, actually, it's one of the few countries where the US actually has a trade surplus with us. Kind of depends on how you measure that, but we're more or less in balance. So we're applying the US formula, but then that would suggest that perhaps we've been disproportionately hit by being swept up in that 10% tariff. So how much of a win is that really? And what this is really showing us is that the Trump administration is going after countries that have big deficits, where the US has big trade deficits with them. So the big importers, the major products that US consumers like to purchase. And that undoubtedly will have an impact on inflation in the US. It's going to hurt economic growth. And that's something that the financial markets have been digesting. So let's have a look at how financial markets responded. Well, negatively. You can see here, FTSE 100 opened 1.5% down. US markets haven't yet opened, but this is the Nasdaq Futures Index, one of the major indices in the US. And you can see after that announcement, there was a bit of optimism. Perhaps he wouldn't go as far as they feared, but after that announcement, it was perhaps more aggressive than they were expecting, down 5.9%. And overnight, Asian markets, look at this, Japan, it's been hit with that 24% reciprocal tariff, the Nikkei down 3%. China hit with a 34% reciprocal tariff. You can see indices in Hong Kong and China down 1.6% and 0.5% respectively. And I think over the past month or so, what we've seen is a lot of tumult in the financial markets as investors readjust, recalibrate their expectations of how far they think Donald Trump will go. And now we wait for the reciprocal tariffs to see how countries respond. And we can only expect that volatility to continue.
An author and journalist was among at least a few people who stumbled upon a very strange discovery yesterday about how the Trump administration went about calculating which countries should be hit with what reciprocal tariffs.
It's so simple that it seemed improbable that they would have done it this way. But I think initially my reaction was just like, no way. And then it was like, oh yes, way, of course.
I'll show you the math trade experts say is so crude and misleading. The ones we spoke to all had the same reaction.
The way they calculated this just simply doesn't make any sense.
I'm surprised that they actually had a formula. It seemed like the tariffs were sort of random and plucked from air, and it wasn't clear what criteria one was going to use.
Now, yesterday was a big day for Trump, Liberation Day, the announcement of universal and reciprocal tariffs against almost every single country on Earth. And the key prop of the afternoon was this chart.
It's very windy out here. We didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing.
That giant board was page 1 of a list of new reciprocal tariffs against more than 180 countries, which is almost all of them. And you can't make it out so far away, but if I show you the original image that board was made from, you can see the second column corresponding to each country is labeled in fine print, tariffs charged to the USA. And then in even finer print, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. And every country shows a different number. So to translate, this is what the Trump administration says. It calculated for every single country what tariff they effectively put on US goods, if you factor in not just their tariffs, but also all kinds of unfair things those countries do to put America at a disadvantage.
For nations that treat us badly, we will calculate the combined rate of all their tariffs, non-monetary barriers, and other forms of cheating.
Except the actual math of their calculation is so rudimentary and does not directly relate at all, as advertised, to actual tariffs or currency or trade barriers. What they appear to have done was to take the US trade deficit in physical goods with each country, divided by total US imports of goods from that country, turn that into a percentage, and that's it. That's what they misleadingly call tariffs charged to the USA. And if I actually do the math for you, you'll see why this doesn't make any sense. Take China. We can find from government figures what the US trade deficit with them was last year, and that's 295.4 billion. If you divide that number by total US imports from China that same year, that's $438.9 billion. One number divided by the other, and what you get is 67.3%. And sure enough, this is the tariff the Trump White House accuses China of charging. Problem is, this number is clearly not derived at all from any tariff China charges.
The fact that we know now that it was a simple division of two numbers is perhaps a bit embarrassing to the administration.
Now, I've manually checked all 185 countries on this list. It took me about 3 hours, and every single tariff appeared to have been calculated this same way. The White House would eventually publish this explanation, where they show a more complicated looking formula, except we can break this down too. And this might be a bit much, but for transparency, let's dive right in. The effective tariff rate, that's this series of symbols and letters on the left, that's what they're trying to figure out for each country, right? And to get there, they take into account how sensitive customers are to higher prices and how likely prices are to increase, which they set at 4 and 0.25, respectively. But multiply them, and they effectively cancel each other out to equal simply 1. And we know that multiplying anything by 1 does nothing. So clean that up, and you're left with something a lot more straightforward, where X is defined as total goods exports, M is total goods imports. Subtract one from the other, that's what a trade imbalance in goods is. And if it's a deficit, that divided by total imports is basically what we said from the start.
It doesn't even attempt to measure what those tariffs are. They're not measuring other countries' tariffs. It's not measuring other countries' non-tariff measures. It's not even measuring currency manipulation. It's just taking the trade deficit as an ipso facto reflection of those things.
Now, the thing is, if you really think about it, you can kind of understand why the US government would see their math as some kind of approximation for how unfair each country is being. Because mathematically, what you're doing when you take a trade deficit divided by total imports is you're measuring what percentage of what that country sells to you goes unmatched by what you sell to them. That's what a trade deficit is. How much more they sell to you than you sell to them. But it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Just to use an analogy, like we as households, we as consumers, we have trade surpluses and trade deficits with different entities in the economy. Most of us run a massive trade deficit with our grocery store. Most of us have a massive trade surplus with our employer. They pay us, but we don't buy anything from them. Are these things that are problems we need to remedy? So in some sense, the underlying premise that bilateral trade imbalances are necessarily bad is just wrong.
But Trump thinks they're bad. He would prefer to be the seller making money as opposed to the buyer spending it, which he's allowed to think. But again, this claim of his that all these numbers on this list are effectively the tariff rates that countries charge the US when they're just not at all, and then to use those simplistic calculations to in turn inform the actual reciprocal tariff that, as a matter of official trade policy, the US is going to then impose on actual products from real businesses all over the world.
You're going to have a lot of people out there believing something that's not true, namely that Vietnam has a tariff rate of 90% on US exports and Cambodia has a tariff rate of 97%. So that's just bad, right? It just gives people a false view of the world.
You know, Trump wields tariffs as a serious weapon of global trade.
The word tariff to me is the most beautiful word in the entire dictionary, okay?
We've seen how even the simple threat of tariffs can erase trillions of dollars in stock market value and force companies on every side of the border into a decision-making tailspin because they don't know how to plan their supply chains in the face of such wacky numbers.
We may have short-term some little pain, and people understand that.
And Trump would say this works towards a noble and important goal, which is to restore the economic engine of American manufacturing. Except this most recent attempt to level the playing field, it isn't supported by sophisticated models or rigorous analysis. It's a shortcut, an oversimplified reduction arbitrarily divided by 2.
And because we are being very kind, we're kind people, we will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us.
The idea behind them was that Trump could use the tariffs we're imposing and say, oh, you're imposing a 90% tariff, but we're going to impose a 45% tariff, so let's negotiate your tariffs down. But when the 90% number is fake, then what do you do? Like, how do you negotiate it down? If you're Cambodia or Vietnam, how do you know how far to bring it down, and what are you even bringing down? Because the core problem isn't the trade barriers you have in place. The core problem is you're not buying enough stuff from the United States, and we're buying too much stuff, in Trump's mind, from you.
I'll show you one last thing. This list, one other thing I found curious was how so many countries have exactly 10% written here as the effective tariff rate that they charge the US. Isn't that weird? Like, all these countries charge the US the exact same 10% rate? Well, again, I checked every single one, and all of them, all 115 of them, actually buy more from the US than they sell, which gives the US a trade surplus. As in, by Trump's definition, these are the countries the US currently rips off. But Trump's answer to that is to punish them anyway, to charge their goods a 10% tariff. I don't know what logic explains that.
We want to now take a deep dive.
The good news is the Nintendo Switch 2 is coming very soon, specifically on June the 5th. But there's also bad news. Nintendo has jumped on the gameflation bandwagon hard with a price of $450. For those keeping score at home, that is 50% more than the OG Switch. And there's more. It was very clear from today's Direct that Nintendo learned some big lessons from the Wii U, like that teaching people what makes the console different from its predecessor is a good idea. What might not be a good idea, though, is charging people for those lessons. I mean, seriously, Nintendo, what the heck? And seriously, Linus, why the heck are you still gonna buy 2 of them? Well, because aside from the bad bits, that might have been one of the strongest console showcases that I have ever seen. We got oodles of details on the hardware itself, new online features, and most importantly, games. There's old favorites, there's some soon-to-be new favorites, and some big surprises. What won't surprise you, though, is that as I'm continuing the sentence, I'm already 15 words into this segue to our sponsor, dbrand. If you want to make sure you've got the best Switch 2 case that dbrand makes, the Kill Switch 2, check it out at IamVeryShort.com. While they didn't dive into anything especially technical, Nintendo did confirm a lot of what we suspected was coming on the Switch 2. At its core, it's still a juiced and jacked up Switch, but there are also important quality of life improvements that really set it apart from its predecessor, like a built-in microphone, improved speakers, active cooling in the dock for stronger performance on the big screen, bigger and faster storage, and bringing Nintendo finally into this decade, support for 4K HDR output. Not gonna lie, guys, that one's a big relief for me after all those rumors that it would be stuck at 1080p. But now we also know that the tablet got a big upgrade from 720p to 1080p. And maybe more importantly, it is now 120 Hz refresh rate with support for variable refresh rate. These are both huge wins. I mean, with the amount of competitive gaming that takes place on Nintendo hardware, seeing them finally take latency seriously is a giant relief, and especially on a mobile device where frame rates can be all over the place, variable refresh rate is great for perceived animation smoothness. What isn't a win, though, is the panel technology in the launch version of the console. After the original Switch OLED, I was very hopeful that that would be the end of LCD displays for Nintendo. But knowing that that would have certainly pushed the launch price to $499, I can at least understand why they felt the need to hold off for the inevitable OLED refresh. It just sucks for me because I know I'm gonna buy the launch one and the refreshed one, hence the title of this video. Ugh. Speaking of things you need to buy over and over again, we got a few more details about the new Joy-Cons, including a closer look at the magnetic lock and release system that looks like a huge improvement in function and reliability over the old rail system, the bigger shoulder buttons on the inside rails that will hopefully make using Joy-Cons in landscape mode somewhat tolerable, and the new mouse functionality that, well, I gotta say, I was just plain wrong about. See, in our last rumor roundup, I hedged, okay? In the video, I was like, maybe it'll happen. Off camera though, I was adamant that there's no way Nintendo would take the world's worst controller and then turn it into also the world's worst mouse. But I was wrong. Or maybe I was wrong. I mean, Nintendo, it looks so uncomfortable. You could still just bail. It is an option. Another big surprise for me was the C button, present on both the right Joy-Con and the new Pro Controller that looks just like Gen 1, plus the addition of a 3.5mm jack. The speculation around the meaning of C was rampant, with some folks proposing some pretty cool ideas for it. Unfortunately, we ended up with the most disappointing one. It's a chat button. Yep, Nintendo spent a few minutes showing off their new Game Chat feature that connects players online via voice chat, with a brand new menu brought up with the C button. That's right, folks, after 23 years, Nintendo has finally caught up to the first generation Xbox. Speaking of generations, that is so long ago that the 9-year-olds that were shrieking into your ears in Halo 1 literally have their own 9-year-old kids who will now shriek into your ears in Mario Kart World. But wait, there's more. Game Chat will also support streaming your gameplay to your friends at what appears to be 480p sub 10 FPS. I mean, it's still neat, I guess, if you've never heard of Discord. And you can even buy an optional webcam and add your face to the stream, or even to supported games. Wow! Nintendo also caught up to the PS2's iToy, both in terms of gameplay implementation and camera quality. A big question this all raises for me, though, is, quality of the features aside, what's going to become of Nintendo's family-friendly image? Even support for emotes feels like a relatively new addition for Nintendo. With voice chat? Honestly, how many hours are gonna pass after I hand my 8-year-old a Switch 2 for her to hear her first N-word? And I realize that that's a really strong way to put that, but serious mode here for a second. As a parent watching this reveal, Nintendo did show off some new parental controls, but I still have a lot of questions that I need answered before I hand one of these things to my kid. Okay, back to excitement. Speaking of online, Nintendo is adding some GameCube games to the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pass, meaning you'll be able to play F-Zero GX, Soul Calibur 2, and Wind Waker on the Switch too, all at a higher resolution than the original GameCube, but seemingly not quite HD, like the full Wind Waker HD remaster that is still currently marooned on Wii U Island. Give us that version, Nintendo. Thankfully though, you'll be able to play GameCube games online with your friends, customize your controls to fit a modern controller, or buy a wireless GameCube style controller with more games looking to be added in the near future. Honestly, pretty stoked for a whole new generation of gamers to get to fall in love with some of the all-time classics that really haven't gotten as much love as they deserve. I'm even more stoked that Nintendo, of all companies, is loosening restrictions on game sharing. Now, even online, in supported games, up to 3 friends will be able to play multiplayer games with you, even if they don't own a copy. That means you probably won't need to buy 4 copies of the new Mario Kart across your friend group, even though, if you're being honest, you still will. And this is in addition to Nintendo's recent improvements to console and family sharing for digital games that we saw last week. Absolutely fantastic. What feels a little less fantastic, though, is Nintendo's approach to updating the experience of Switch 1 games on the Switch 2 hardware. Personally, I was hoping that I could just play the same game at 60 or even, dare I say, 120 FPS, but it looks like instead these are mostly going to be paid upgrades on a per game basis. The good news is that it seems like they generally include real performance and visual upgrades, as well as additions to the games that range from exciting, like new DLC chapters, to kinda sorta nifty, like new game modes, to one of the stupidest second screen features that I can even imagine.
Proceed north.
Now, I can't be mad yet, because I don't know the price for any of these upgrade packs, and they did announce that some of them will be free for some games. It's just a little frustrating when you compare to some of the other handhelds that seem to be on the horizon, like the rumored Xbox X ROG Ally that I imagine is going to be capable of the same, if not better performance, for free on every OG Switch game. Though, with that said, I doubt it'll manage the same 2 to 6.5 hours of battery life that Nintendo's advertising. So there is that. And if we look at some of the first-party Switch 2 games that likely you won't be able to yar anytime soon, it may be worth it to stick with Big Red for your next upgrade. The first thing Nintendo showed off was Mario Kart World, the long-awaited sequel to the Karting King, now with a bit of open-world exploration in between your contests, seemingly like Crash Team Racing. It also boasts 24 racer, not necessarily player, support, which seems pretty slick, and it looks better, though not by as much as some folks seem to have hoped, which is a stark reminder of just how much juice Nintendo can squeeze out of low-powered hardware, which makes me pretty excited for the future capabilities of this new handheld, even if the launch titles might not look like that much. Jumping to the end of the presentation, the last thing Nintendo showed off was Donkey Kong Bonanza. It's the first 3D Donkey Kong game since literally the N64, and you'll be digging your way through destructible environments, platforming your way to giant bananas, and punching bosses, all while wearing pants. Very respectable, Mr. Kong. We also got our first look at Kirby Air Riders, a new Hyrule Warriors for the people who are into that, a wheelchair basketball game that focuses on mouse movement, and lastly, what actually looks to be a tutorial where you walk around activating text boxes that tell you about the Switch 2 with some minigames sprinkled in. And yes, that bit in the intro was not a joke. Nintendo wants real, actual money for Switch 2 Welcome Tour. Is this even the same company that put Wii Sports in the box of a $250 console? Okay, so maybe there's not that much on the first party side, which normally would be a death knell for a Nintendo console. But check this out. Strong third-party game support? No, that would be an understatement. We saw, I kid you not, 48 non-Nintendo titles during the Direct, with 15 being available at launch and 21 more coming before the end of the year. Immediate standouts for me were definitely the new From Software game, Duskbloods, a more modern set, multiplayer Bloodborne-esque, and Demon X Machina, a cross between Vanquish and Armored Core. We also saw classic heavy hitters like Elden Ring, Street Fighter VI, now with added Waggle, Hogwarts Legacy featuring mouse magic, Hitman, Cyberpunk 2077, the upcoming Borderlands 4, and whoa, Final Fantasy is back! That's right, baby! Final Fantasy VII Remake, let's go! EA and 2K are even porting their biggest sports franchises. We're getting a new Tony Hawk, and that new 007 from IO Interactive was teased. Wait, teased again? Come on, guys, show me some gameplay! We're also getting some indie darlings like Hollow Knight Silksong, which I'll believe is actually coming in 2025 when it's out in 2025, Hades 2, and new chapters for Deltarune. As a big handheld lover, by the way, the quality of the visuals in the gameplay that was shown was really impressive to me, with many of the games appearing to run with noticeably better fidelity than what we've seen on most PC handhelds. There are a couple of potential reasons for this. One is that Nintendo is likely running their demos docked, which is going to give the Switch 2 more performance. And the other is that NVIDIA, the provider of the Switch 2's GPU, just plain knows what they're doing when it comes to efficient gaming, and especially when it comes to AI upscaling. Now, the words DLSS were never mentioned in the video, but looking at what I'm looking at, I stand by what I said. If the Switch 2 doesn't have some form of AI upscaling, I will buy and eat an entire box of this Super Mario cereal with Mountain Dew as the milk live on Wanshow. Now let's talk about the value. $450 is the price for the base console, and I really do mean base, given that you have to pay for the freaking instruction manual. Sorry, I know this is the third time I've mentioned this, but I'm still annoyed about it. Then it's gonna be $500 for the bundle with Mario Kart World. Now, That's not an outlandish price, at least when you consider its functionality as both a living room console and a portable console. But a 50% price bump versus its predecessor is certainly going to make it a less obvious purchase for many families out there. And that's on top of new games getting a wicked next-gen tax. I didn't mention yet that Mario Kart World sets a new high mark for pricing at $80 for a digital copy, with the physical copy rumored to be even higher. Now, not every title is going to be so expensive, but this is Nintendo, so it also probably won't be the only one at that price. So if you look at this as spending a whole console's worth of dollars for what is essentially an evolutionary change, the Switch 2 kind of looks like a big miss. But from my point of view, it's been almost 4 years since Nintendo has asked for any money from me for a console, and 8 years since the original Switch. And when you consider that the Switch 2 addresses most of the fundamental issues that I had with the original, which is exactly what a good sequel should do, it's hard not to get at least a little excited about it. Especially with Nintendo actually taking strong action against scalpers to ensure that gamers can freaking buy these things and not just resellers. Now, personally, I am fairly irritated that they are requiring 12 months of Nintendo Online, which I don't pay for on principle, because I shouldn't have to buy a subscription to back up my save games. But I still do have to acknowledge that they've done something to ensure that their most ardent fans can pre-order this thing at MSRP. And I also have to acknowledge you for listening to this segue to our sponsor, dbrand. Now, I'm a little annoyed at dbrand right now. Not because their vanity URL is IamVeryShort.com, but because I thought that they were gonna send me one of their kill switch cases for the Switch 2. So dbrand, where is it? Oh, we actually don't have one, great. I am still excited for the case though. I thought it was a setup. One of my biggest issues with the original Switch was the terrible Joy-Con ergonomics. And considering that my hands aren't very big, that's really saying something. Well, the Switch 2 doesn't fix that, but the super ergonomic hand grips on the kill switch look way more comfortable. One thing I was curious to find out is how dbrand was going to handle OEM dock compatibility. Well, as it turns out, the answer is a totally custom dock adapter with built-in USB 4. Not only does it give you full data and power pass-through, but it actually turns your system into a nice little trophy display. Finally, the latest kill switch has an all-new game card holder. It lets you take up to 10 game cards with you on the go, and it's built into the crush-proof travel cover. Now, I know a lot of us around here are going to take advantage of our free dbrand products perk for this one. Do we have that? Oh, that's hilarious. But for the rest of you out there, if you want to make sure you've got the best Switch 2 case at launch, you'll have to reserve yours at, you guessed it, IamVeryShort.com. If you want some more Switch 2 details, you should check out the last video we made, which is more...
People have no idea how crazy things are about to get. You know, first we started off hearing that Grand Theft Auto 6 could bring price hikes up to $100. Journalists and developers cheering it on. Yes, this is exactly what we need to have happen. Increase the prices. Now the shoe is on the other foot. Journalists and developers and analysts are saying that Grand Theft Auto 6 could very well be a threat to the entire industry. A game so successful and so disruptive that it could shut down entire studios and publishers. This is the most anticipated game of all time, and it could be the most successful game of all time, depending on how things go, and that could be a catalyst to an apocalypse of sorts. Something that's not just going to be felt by the initial release, but could very well freeze the entire industry for months before its release and after its release. We are going to see years of overpromising, under-delivering, and failing to listen catch up to a vast majority of this industry. They have failed to stay competitive, they have gotten complacent, and because of that, one game could bring the world down around them. One game. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the success of Grand Theft Auto. We're going to talk about the behemoth that it became, how it became that way, because we need to understand it to know what it's going to do next. And we're going to talk about how Grand Theft Auto might be so successful, it's going to shut down studios for good. Every Grand Theft Auto launch has been a moment in gaming history, not just a release date, but a cultural flashpoint. GTA 3 launched back in 2001, and it changed everything, setting the blueprint for modern open world games by combining freedom, story, and chaos in a 3D city that truly felt alive. Funny enough, When Rockstar was trying to get funding for their new game, they approached Microsoft, who was preparing to launch the original Xbox, and they were looking for exclusives, but Microsoft actually turned them down, believing that there wasn't a market for something so controversial. And they doubted that Rockstar would even be able to pull it off. That game would then go on to sell 14.5 million copies. That's a number that AAA studios struggle to reach even today, let alone back in 2001. Vice City built on that only a year later with a style over substance attitude that somehow still had both, and it reached 17 million copies sold. And then San Andreas in 2004 expanded the scope massively that it felt like an entirely new genre. They introduced layered systems, character customization, and a layer of exploration that few games have matched even decades later. Each entry didn't just succeed, it set a standard. But GTA's dominance wasn't just commercial, it was cultural. These games didn't just show up on the front page of gaming sites, they made headlines in mainstream news. Politicians were condemning them and celebrities were trying to get featured in them. It was one of the very few series where controversy actually became its marketing, and it worked. GTA wasn't just a game you played, it was something that you had to have an opinion on, even if you never touched a controller. Now, by the time GTA 4 rolled around, the series had already hit sort of a saturation point. Everybody knew what it was, but Rockstar still wanted it to grow even bigger, and they knew if they wanted to do that, the series had to evolve. So they leaned hard into cinematic realism, storytelling, and emotional weight, foreshadowing what we'd later see them perfect in Red Dead Redemption. They overhauled systems like driving and shooting, but more importantly, they had proved that this franchise could be more than just satire, crime, and explosions. It could have soul. That shift in priorities ended up paying off, and that game ended up reaching 28 million copies sold. But then came GTA 5 in 2013, and it wasn't just a hit game, it became one of the most profitable pieces of entertainment media ever made. As of 2025, GTA 5 has sold over 210 million copies, with the Grand Theft Auto franchise as a whole crossing 420 million copies sold. It's not just one of the biggest video game successes of all time, it is one of the most dominant media properties in human history, second only to Minecraft. Just to illustrate how absurd that 210 million copies sold number is, the highest selling Pokemon game of all time, Red, Blue, and Yellow, sold 47 million copies. Pokemon, the world's largest franchise, full stop, as a whole, is only 60 million copies ahead of Grand Theft Auto's total copies sold. That is insane. Now, part of that dominance comes from Rockstar not chasing trends. GTA 5 did its own thing. It offered 3 protagonists, a massive and detailed map, smart comedy, great controls, and an incredibly accurate take on Los Angeles. But what really extended the game's lifespan was GTA Online, a constantly evolving multiplayer ecosystem that in a lot of ways invented what we see in the live service model today, and it changed the entire gaming industry. Earlier games like World of Warcraft, Team Fortress, and even Call of Duty seasonal DLCs experimented with persistent updates and monetization, but GTA Online was the first to blend Rockstar's cinematic single-player legacy with an open-ended, community-driven sandbox supported by a decade of free content and paid drops. It became a second life for millions of players around the world and a blueprint for how publishers could turn a one-time purchase into an ongoing revenue machine. I mean, as of this moment, GTA 5 Legacy and Enhanced Editions are pulling over 180,000 players combined on Steam. Not counting Epic Games Launcher, not counting the Rockstar Launcher, not counting consoles or any other platforms. And it's continued this pace for over a decade. Let that sink in. We know this wasn't just Rockstar's golden touch because they tried it again with Red Dead Online and it didn't stick. Despite Red Dead Redemption 2 being one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time, a massive favorite among fans, the online component never reached the same scale. It lacked the same flexibility, the same energy, the same community buy-in. It's not just about making a good game anymore. It's about making one that people want to live in. I mean, if you guys think about it, Rockstar didn't even plan for what became the game's biggest feature, GTA RP. Through modded servers and third-party tools, players carved out entire identities, careers, and communities within GTA Online, completely independent of Rockstar's original vision. These aren't just small niche servers either. They exploded in popularity on Twitch, became homes for professional voice actors, streamers, and even celebrities, and gave rise to some of the most emergent player-driven storytelling I think we've ever seen in a video game before. While these other studios are trying to spend millions of dollars to manufacture community engagement and force players into predefined seasonal loops, Rockstar accidentally made the perfect sandbox. And the community then turned it into a digital stage. It's living proof that if you give players the freedom and tools instead of a roadmap, well, they'll often build something more compelling than a studio ever could. And I think that's what makes this franchise so powerful. GTA is so chaotic, unfiltered, insolent, and intelligent. It in a lot of ways mocks the industry that makes it, even the players that play it, and the world it represents. It connects players across all demographics because it offers something incredibly rare in this industry: freedom. It's both casual and hardcore. It can be a cinematic experience, a sandbox of absurdity, or something deeply social. And that's why when GTA 6 finally lands, it's not just going to compete with other games, it's going to compete with everything else: streaming shows, blockbuster movies, social media. It's going to dominate the cultural bandwidth again. And I think that's the terrifying part for everyone else, because for all the games that we've seen that have come and gone over the last decade, nothing has maintained a death grip on relevance like GTA 5. It has been nearly 12 years since the initial release, and it's still outperforming new AAA launches. Rockstar hasn't released a mainline game since Red Dead Redemption 2, and they've remained one of the most talked about studios in the world just off of the strengths of 2 games. That's what real power looks like, and the only thing that I could really compare it to is Valve, and that says a lot. Now, I haven't played a Grand Theft Auto since San Andreas, and I just recently went back to go play Grand Theft Auto 5, trying to get some footage for this video, and it's like a time capsule. It is a time capsule for how games used to feel like to play. The character portrayals, the tight controls, the dialogue, the storytelling, the atmosphere, everything a player wants out of a game or expects out of a game is here. And the elements that we expect the least, well, they just only add to the immersion. The act of playing the game feels fantastic, but then you find yourself golfing, playing tennis, or maybe you're just chilling on the couch watching your favorite TV shows like Kung Fu Rainbow Laser Force, where conservative heroes are trying to fight to keep everybody virgins, or Impotent Rage, the liberal superhero that's trying to take down corporate corruption through tantrums while also owning their own multi-billion-dollar company. You know, everybody wants what Rockstar has, but nobody's been able to recreate it. Not for a lack of trying. Dozens of studios have tried to take their shot at being the next big crime sandbox, from Watch Dogs to Sleeping Dogs to Saints Row, and we got a couple of good games out of it as a result, but those results always end up feeling synthetic. They copy the structure without understanding the spirit. They try to capture the edge without earning the credibility. What they miss is that GTA isn't just about gameplay or genre, it's about tone, cultural timing. It's a studio that mocks the very systems it profits from. You can't fake that, and you can't buy it either. The reality of the matter is, Rockstar didn't build GTA with quarterly targets in mind. They built it with an attitude. There's a level of self-awareness in these games that most publishers would kill well before it even left the concept phase, except for maybe Cyberpunk 2077. GTA is one of the last remaining franchises where writing is still allowed to punch in every direction, where the world is offensive, ridiculous, and absurd on purpose. And I think that's what gives it life, because that is life in a lot of ways. That's what makes the satire feel earned rather than forced, and why so many other games end up falling flat. They're scared to say something real, or worse, they don't even know how to. Rockstar has built a reputation for itself, one that we don't normally see in the AAA side of this industry, not just for quality, but for consistency. They rarely speak, but when they do, people listen. Player expectations are through the roof right now, but nobody seems down on the game. And even with all of the AAA flops that everybody's been seeing, well, everybody just has a feeling that this game is going to deliver. And while normally I'm a skeptic, after playing Grand Theft Auto 5 and having played some of their previous games, I get it. There's something deeply human about Grand Theft Auto that no other studio can seemingly replicate. And I don't think people fully grasp how big of a moment the launch of Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to be. I didn't even realize it until I started looking into the numbers and looking at the data, and how did I not see this coming? We are talking about a game that is financially, culturally, historically, definitively the game. It is one of the very few games on a very short list that I know almost everybody in the world has either heard about or played. And you can't say that about a lot of games, even if they're not gamers. If I shrink that down to just gamers, everybody's played it. I'm sure there's a few people that haven't. That is a very, very small subsection of the audience. That's crazy. That's how impressive and significant this IP is, while also being the most controversial and offensive game ever made in a lot of ways. We're talking about a game that sold 220 million copies, bridging the gap between race, age, gender, any definitive trait. Anyone can play and buy this game. And what's funny is that flies in the face of everything that this industry stands for. Because at the end of the day, when any of these companies that are trying to reach a wider audience, and I've talked about this in the past, almost all of them, that boils down to softening the edges, tone policing, or just general sensitivity. And then you look at this game. If you look at the top 10 best-selling games of all time, they're almost all E for everyone or T for teen. And then there's Grand Theft Auto, right there in second place. You know, people dropped their jaws when they saw Black Myth Wukong reach 20 million copies sold in a month. This game could very well sell 20 million copies in a day. And if they release day and date on PC, they double that number. And that's not the route they're going for whatever reason, likely because they want to double dip. It's going to work. You know, I talk about how I don't want these companies to be greedy, but if you're going to be greedy, you have to earn it. Rockstar's earned it. That's how this works. But that's the reason why this industry is terrified of this game right now, because there's no one that is out there, no game that is out there that can stand up to this thing. And that's the bed that they've made for themselves. This game is going to capture conversation. It's going to take over social media, and it's going to blot out the sun in a lot of ways. There's just going to be no getting around it. And because of that, because of how dominant this game is going to be once it releases, well, it's going to cause the collapse of studios, publishers, and games industry-wide. Today, many companies are in a state of absolute fragility financially, creatively, structurally. In the past couple of years, we've seen over 50,000 jobs that have been lost across the entire gaming industry. Developers, artists, designers, people with years of experience are being laid off in the thousands. Entire studios are being shut down. Projects are being canceled mid-development. Publishers consolidating, pivoting, restructuring, whatever corporate term they need to be able to use to say that we made bad bets and now somebody else has to pay for it. And the games that have made it to release, half of them haven't even been able to find an audience. Some of the biggest AAA launches that we've seen over the past couple of years, games with enormous budgets and years of hype behind them, have turned out to be massive disappointments, not just financially, but in the eyes of players that they were meant to serve. The trust is gone, the margins are thin, and the cost for failure is higher than ever. So when a game like Grand Theft Auto 6 enters into the conversation, a game so massive, so dominant, and so all-consuming that it can literally reshape the release calendar for an entire year, it doesn't just make people nervous, it makes them panic. Because one wrong move in the shadow of a game like this, that's all it takes. In an article written by Tyler Wilde, a PC gamer, titled "The Spectre of a GTA 6 Delay Haunts the Games Industry, Some Companies Are Gonna Tank If They Guess Wrong," says analyst, will GTA 6 release in 2025? That's what everyone in the business wants to know. Tyler Wilde writes, "The near future plans of many game studios depend on whether or not Grand Theft Auto 6 actually releases this year, and making the wrong guess could be disastrous for some of them," says Ben Porter, director of consulting of game industry intelligence firm Newzoo. If you're a game company who's holding its breath waiting for GTA 6 to get out and then it gets delayed by 3, 4, 5, 6 months, what do? Said Porter in an interview with PC Gamer at GDC 2025 this week. You either have to be able to launch in that big black hole that's been left open now, or you have to extend your run date by an additional 6 months. I'm certain some companies are going to tank as a result of that, right? GTA 6 is currently scheduled to launch on consoles this fall. PC is still to be decided, annoyingly, but it's so common for games to be delayed that it's easy to imagine it being pushed back to 2026. Cyberpunk 2077 was delayed, Starfield was delayed, Assassin's Creed Shadows was delayed. Big games get delayed a lot. It's common for studios to time their releases to avoid big competitors that are likely to hog the limelight, and there isn't a bigger hog than a new GTA. Even very niche games might want to get out of the way of it, picking release dates in spring or summer of 2026. But if GTA 6 itself is delayed till spring or summer of 2026, those developers could end up having to push their release dates even further out, a setback that could be disastrous for a studio whose finances are already fragile. And given the number of closures we've seen in recent years, financial fragility doesn't seem rare. On the other hand, a last-minute GTA 6 delay could be a big opportunity for anyone who can fill the space with a game that tides over disappointed GTA fans. There's a lot of money riding on what Rockstar decides to do before the end of the year, and not just for Rockstar. One possible clue to the likelihood of a GTA 6 delay is the Borderlands 4 release date, September 23rd, 2025. Why would Take-Two, who owns both Borderlands 4 and Grand Theft Auto 6, put them in competition with each other this fall? Does Borderlands 4 release date mean that GTA 6 is likely to be delayed? It's a sensible guess, but I wouldn't want money riding on it. Porter says there's hope that the games industry as a whole could get a boost from GTA 6's release, which, if nothing else, will probably get a lot of people to upgrade their consoles, but he doubts that the industry execs are all going to be smiles this fall, whatever happens. You hear a lot of people who are saying that GTA 6 is going to rejuvenate the market, said Porter, and I think there's an element of truth to that, but I don't know that it's necessarily going to be universally uplifting. It'll certainly create an effect. It will put eyes back onto the games market from investors and things like that. But everybody that we're talking to, their ships are trying to move out of the way of this big iceberg that is GTA 6. Everybody is pulling their game forward, pushing their game back. this strategy is to get out of the way. So if that's what everybody's behavior is, then how do you think that this is going to rejuvenate the games industry? I'm gonna tell it to you guys straight. I think we're gonna see some genuinely unfinished games hit the market very soon here. Rushed out the door, not because they're ready, but because they feel like the clock is ticking. Unless Rockstar publicly sets a firm release date for Grand Theft Auto 6 soon, developers and publishers are gonna start panicking. And if they panic, well, they're gonna panic in the worst way possible by trying to guess. The only good answer here, the only move that offers them any type of breathing room, is to launch before Grand Theft Auto 6. Because if you launch after it, well, it's already too late. It doesn't matter how good your game is. There is a very real chance that nobody is going to be paying attention. People are going to be knee-deep into Grand Theft Auto 6, talking about it, streaming it, and living in it. Games that launch during Grand Theft Auto 6's window are going to be crushed. Games that launch directly after it are going to be ignored. And the studios that wait too long, hoping the storm will pass, they're gambling with time that they may not have. Some of these companies are already running on fumes. A delay of a few extra months could end up pushing some of these guys into bankruptcy, especially if their only shot at survival fails to land. I'm not being hyperbolic here. It's simple math. We've seen the budgets that these companies have been spending. And what's terrifying is nobody is safe. Not the indies, not the AA studios, not the biggest AAA publishers in the world. Grand Theft Auto 6 isn't just going to be a game. It's going to be a cultural event. It will pull everyone into its orbit, whether they like it or not. It doesn't matter what genre you're in or whether or not your game is live service, single player, or a turn-based cozy farming simulator roguelike, you will feel this game's presence because the players you're trying to reach are going to be somewhere else. Now, what's crazy is that Newzoo actually saw this coming. In a 2023 survey, they had found that most players were sticking to older games and older live service games, with Grand Theft Auto Online being one of the biggest ones. And that tells you something. A huge part of the gaming audience is not constantly chasing the next release. They are waiting for the next big thing, and when Grand Theft Auto 6 drops, that group is going to migrate en masse. Whole communities are going to shift overnight. Streamers are going to jump ship. Player bases are going to crater. Games that were holding on just fine are going to find themselves abandoned, not because they did anything wrong, but because Rockstar simply just showed up. I mean, this is a release that could literally pull people away from their hobbies, away from movies, away from Netflix, away from social media, away from their friends, and we don't actually have any modern data to be able to predict what that impact is going to look like. The last time this franchise released a mainline title was over a decade ago. The landscape is completely different now. Gaming has grown exponentially. Streaming and YouTube have taken over entertainment, and the audience is even bigger and more plugged in than ever before. Whatever impact GTA 5 had, well, let's just raise that by a few exponents. And what makes this all the more unpredictable is the current AAA landscape is weaker than it's ever been. Sure, we've had a few commercial successes. Call of Duty Black Ops 6 made some waves, even though it fizzled out thanks to Activision's ongoing identity crisis. Hogwarts Legacy had a massive year. Monster Hunter Wilds is doing great, but these aren't industry-shifting releases. In fact, many of the biggest breakout successes we've seen haven't come from the top of the food chain. They've come from the middle and the margins. Indie and AA games that have been filling the gaps from these bloated, over-compromised AAA failures. We haven't seen what a real AAA, megaton, no misstep juggernaut can do in this era of widespread volatility, but we're about to. And that's actually where I agree with the article. Grand Theft Auto 6 might rejuvenate the industry, but not in the way that they think. If Rockstar sticks to their tone and identity, the things that define Grand Theft Auto 5, if they don't try to soften it, don't sanitize it, don't try to thread the needle with authenticity and ideology, then it could reset the standard for what AAA games are supposed to be. If it meets expectations, that's already enough, but if it exceeds them, if it delivers a polished, boundary-pushing, narrative-rich experience that still manages to retain the soul of the franchise, it is going to blow a crater in the middle of the AAA space. Because suddenly there will be no more excuses. No more we didn't have the budget. No more live service demands compromises. No more we had to design the game for the broadest audience possible. We've already seen this happen. Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3 were cultural tipping points. They were both uncompromising games that delivered exactly what players wanted, sometimes more in a lot of cases, and that shifted player expectations overnight. Players want depth, creativity, systems that respect their time, and experiences that don't talk down to them. And let's face it, most of the AAA space isn't built to deliver that. Not anymore. So if GTA 6 clears that bar, or worse for the industry, sets a new one, it's going to trigger another wave of discontent. Players are going to start comparing everything to Grand Theft Auto 6. They're going to start asking harder questions. Why doesn't this game feel alive? Why doesn't this game respect my intelligence? Why doesn't this game offer the freedom and polish that Rockstar proved is possible? And a lot of other studios aren't going to have any good answers, which means lower sales, which means more layoffs, and maybe, just maybe, the long overdue reckoning that this industry has been avoiding for years. So yes, Grand Theft Auto 6 could rejuvenate the industry, not by saving it, but by exposing it. We have never seen a game as successful as Grand Theft Auto 5 get a sequel. Take a minute to think about that. The impact of this game, the effects of this game are going to be so widespread and so earth-shattering that I don't think there's a way to properly comprehend just how big this release is going to be. I'm starting to believe that the reason why they delayed the game on PC isn't because they wanted to double dip, though that is a really nice side benefit that they're going to get. I actually think that they might be doing it because they realize the economic strife that this game is going to cause. I don't even know if I'm doing this story any justice. That's how big this game is. Do you guys remember how big Overwatch was? It was everywhere. It dominated everything. Everyone was talking about it. Grand Theft Auto 5 was 4 Overwatches. It was 4 Pokemon Blue and Red. It was 5 World of Warcrafts. It was 5 Call of Duty Modern Warfares. Like, my brain cannot figure this thing out. This is going to dominate everything. Conversation, TV shows, social media, YouTube, Twitch streams. You're going to see it everywhere. And the industry, as it is today, cannot overcome it. And this is the bed that they've made for themselves, especially the AAA side. Over a decade, not a single one of these studios have been able to make a game that can even slightly compete with what Grand Theft Auto 5 what Grand Theft Auto 5 did, except for Ark Survival Evolved. And that sold 1/3 the amount of copies. And I can't believe that these writers and journalists are talking about how this is going to bring the attention of more investors into this industry. That is the last thing that this industry needs. If these morons come in and think that there's a single franchise or company that can mirror what Grand Theft Auto 6 is doing, you have lost your mind. This series is incomprehensible. It's unquantifiable. You cannot touch it. And all of this is riding on the game being good, right? But to be honest with you, I don't even think that really matters, because they could essentially make the exact same game, update the graphics, and throw in a new map, and the game's going to go nuclear. And we know so little about this game, which is even crazier. Rockstar has said nothing about the game. We haven't seen really anything so far as gameplay or anything outside of the initial reveal trailer. And it's just going to be crazy. All I know is that I can't wait to see what it looks like. And I can't wait to see what effects it's going to have on the industry, because something this big, it's going to do something. That's for sure. Anyway, tell me what you guys think. Maybe you guys can figure this one out. I'm having a hard time. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys did enjoy the video, like the channel, subscribe to the channel, share the channel. Follow me on Twitch. Come watch me live. Talk to me on Twitter. Stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe. Catch you guys in the next one.
Family, 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 family.
So it finally happened. It's been a long road, my friends.
Discord wants to go public, and that's something we already knew from 2024, but what's now changed is that the Financial Times have got sources who say that Discord are actively talking to banks, and that means that it's not a desire, it is a plan that they are progressing along. And if none of this would impact us as users, in a way we wouldn't care. But it will impact users. It arguably has. Things are changing on the app literally right now. And if you've smelled whiffs of enshittification, it's not because you've gone mad, it's because you're a human. We know what enshittification is, we know patterns, and we really hope Discord doesn't go bad. We also know that Discord fundamentally has a problem. Money. That's the problem Discord has, but in a way it's a problem that they always knew they would have. You see, often success is about picking your problem, right? What you're kind of willing to have as an issue, and being a venture-backed tech company, Discord's problem, the thing that they sacrificed, was short-term profitability. And that might sound completely insane, but it's actually typical and it is a real business model. For something like Discord, the value is in users. So there's no point over monetizing a small social network if what you really want to do is grow, and then once you're huge, then generate mad returns, but not necessarily through the company being super profitable. Oh no. Generate mad returns for investors and shareholders by either being acquired by another larger company or by going public. It's very much the typical model, and for Discord, that meant them raising $1 billion across 17 funding rounds over the last while. I'll return to that money soon, but you needed that context of money as a problem, that they've raised all this venture money, to basically understand what's coming next. It's the vital context. Because if you thought the Discord Nitro boosts and cosmetics were enough for an app like this to really work, you'd be wrong. Because Discord are about to massively expand ads. Advertisements are going to hit Discord Mobile this June. Of course, they've been on desktop since last year. And for Discord, they are genuinely a key to the future. Look, here's the thing. I don't like it, by the way, but advertisements do work. That's why RuneScape is even toying with them for its free tier. It's why premium streaming services have now got ads, even on a paid tier. Straight up, if a company just wants more money, ads are the go-to solution, assuming the audience is entrenched and sticky. And if it's something where, it's the only place you can get your TV show conveniently, or say Discord where all your friends are, yeah, you're probably going to tolerate ads. So as a business model, it makes sense. And in fairness to Discord, their ads are not like most. They actually try to do them well. They've got this whole branding about them being quests, and there's in-app cosmetics. That's decently high effort, right? They're smart enough, they're fairly inoffensive, but importantly for brands, they're action, they're results driven, they're very trackable. That is amazing for brands actually tracking what their ad spending is even doing. It's very important. Say if you're an ad buyer and you want to have good numbers you can show to a higher up in the office. And Discord also has another thing. It is massive in demographics that are traditionally harder to reach through conventional marketing channels. That is a huge value. It's the sort of value you'd want to demonstrate if you planned to go public. But here's the thing. I thought we were going to talk about Discord ads for a bit and talk about some of the basic businessy things. The basic story of platform good, platform grow, platform is venture funded, ads and enshittification will follow is still there. But what I did not expect was the grand strategy, the chess that they're playing, and everything else that we dig up. Being nice to have is one thing, but being essential to have is another thing. And Discord wants to be essential, not just to you and me, but also to the industry. So to do that, they have a plan to become a piece of vital internet infrastructure. Now, we've already seen some of this, but only in the form of little nice-to-haves, like having a game integration that means, oh, you can see the final circle in PUBG on Discord if your friends are playing the game. That's hardly vital. That's hardly something you can pitch to the world as being transformational for your business. So how about this instead? Discord as your entire social system. And it means that rather than being a nice-to-have, it's them literally running part of a game. So it's called the Discord Social SDK. And honestly, it's a pretty genius plan, and it is an area ripe for disruption. So as the name suggests, it's an SDK, it's a developer tool. And put simply, it is a complete off-the-shelf system that will handle friends lists, game invites, text chat, and voice chat, all without needing a Discord login. It will all be ran on Discord. It is Discord, but actually logging into Discord isn't required. Though, of course, if you do log into Discord, you'll get extra features. Now, obviously, I then think about what Discord has done with having cosmetics. Oh, there you go. A natural deep integration. That's the kind of thing you can really sell an investor on. So basically, it's free, cross-platform social infrastructure that works out of the box and can run that whole system for your video game. And so far, the developers behind Rust, Splitgate 2, and Theorycraft, Theorycraft Games being a company, they've had early access, but the overall thing is now public for everybody. And in terms of competition, Steam Voice Chat, the Battle.net apps voice chat, I mean, things that exist but aren't really fantastic. And yes, Steam does more. You can join your friends, and that's the sort of thing that this will actually support with the new Discord system. But the point basically is, Steam is very much tied to a storefront. That means that it can't really be as ubiquitous as something like Discord can be. And since so many people already use Discord, I can very much imagine users actually asking developers for this system to be used. But remember the context of this story. Discord wants to go public. And to go public successfully, they will need to demonstrate humongous growth potential. And that's why moving beyond just having users and towards being digital infrastructure is such a well-tuned move to accomplish their goals. It's vital to their plan. But with all of this, we still have that worry of enshitifying Discord. Let's return to the money. With what you've just heard, this will matter a hell of a lot more, and it's actually a more dramatic story than I kind of expected. Okay, do you remember how the pandemic drove stock markets absolutely mad? So Discord very much thought they were part of that vanguard of future companies, right? Where it was always going to be work from home, everyone's using Zoom on their Peloton, the world has changed and it's never going back. At that time, Discord thought of themselves as the community hub for the world, right? More than just gaming. They very much wanted to grow radically beyond where they had started. That didn't really come to pass. They very much now realized they are a social app for gaming. That means for them that infinite user growth would not happen. And that suddenly means that strange concepts like profit and loss actually started to become important to them. Because of that, Discord axed 17% of their headcount as a part of a plan to be profitable by 2024. But in the last year, it seems things have only escalated. So the Financial Times say that they are now talking to banks in order to fund going public. 2024 saw advertisements become a thing. 2025 is seeing those move over to mobile. On the whole going public thing, for their part, Discord are publicly downplaying that that's what they're trying to do. But that's actually exactly what you would do if you wanted to go public, but didn't want rampant speculation to overhype their valuation. And in this case, well, we've got robust sourcing from the Financial Times that says they're literally talking to the banks. And the valuation number will actually matter here. So as I said earlier, they've had $1 billion in funding across 17 rounds. So here's how those investors get their tasty returns. Option number one is to be acquired, and Microsoft allegedly offered them $12 billion in 2021, but they rejected. So I guess no Microsoft Teams gaming for us. Thank God, that would have been horrible. Option two then is to go public. That very much seems to be the plan, and if you watched our video on Thunderful lately, you'll know where that kind of thing can go. Now certainly that Discord rejected a $12 billion offer. That certainly implies either they really didn't want Microsoft or they believe, actually, they have a fair valuation way higher. But that $12 billion offer was in 2021. As of right now, they do have a valuation of about $15 billion, so at least for me, it'll be damn interesting to see, whenever they do go public, what they're actually going to be able to raise. But okay, what does this actually mean for you and for me? Yeah, it's time to talk about enshittification. As we've seen so many times in this channel, things fundamentally change whenever you go public, because what happens then is everything is laid bare for the public and investors to pick apart. But more importantly, the demands of those investors change. So if you're a traditional old business, maybe what people want is a juicy dividend increase. But if you're a modern tech company, well, maybe you'll be seen as what's called a growth stock, where it's not about dividends, it's about pushing up that stock price. And for Discord to be a growth stock, which naturally is its place as a tech company, I'd say, it will need to constantly show great execution while dangling a juicy new carrot over every quarter as much as they can. And not just a small juicy carrot that will drive some revenue, no, large strategic carrots. The sorts of things that let them tell stories to investors of transformational growth. That's why the SDK, the idea of Discord basically running social infrastructure in games, is actually goddamn huge. While their ads expanding is great, you want to have multiple layers at which you can have that big transformational growth. And what lies at the heart of that growth is you. It is your value as a user, and frankly, the leverage that they have over you. Not necessarily in an evil way, but if they run the infrastructure that is your game's social network, they run your friend groups like Discord server, obviously, it's going to be hard for you to move. You could move personally, but are you really going to convince all of your internet friends to leave Discord? And even if you do convince your close friends to leave, what if you're playing a game with other people who are on Discord? It's very, very hard to leave. And that's why moves that make money off you being on Discord are fundamentally important here. But the thing is, being public cuts both ways. I've just talked up the story of showing big growth potential, but let's say numbers don't look good. Let's say earnings growth or earnings per share or margin go down. That's shocking, that's scary, and that's exactly the sort of thing that leads to damaging cost savings, right? Short-term cuts, cutting your nose to spite your face, new monetization schemes, and all sorts of lunacy that we are now used to. And I think the best example of that is ads. Discord have done ads in a way that I would say is well designed, fairly thoughtful, and with a decent amount of care, and also a decent amount of user control. That's because they did adverts on their own terms, with their own goals and incentives, which were longer term about showing growth, likely to successfully go public. But if investors need a lot of money now, if they need to turn around their story as a company, will they have the time to do ads in a thoughtful way that actually works with users? Or will it be short-term money me now because the C-suite are under a lot of pressure from investors and analysts? That is how going public fundamentally changes the sorts of decisions that a company makes and the goals that they have. Hang on a second though, we gotta stop, we gotta have a reality check. The truth is that Discord is basically incredible. Compared to where things were in the past, it's essentially a piece of magic. I mean, I remember the days of Ventrilo, of Xfire. Remember Xfire? To be as huge as Discord, with as many features, and all of those essentially free, is absolutely wild. I mean, Slack's cheapest offering is £7 a month, Teams is £3.10 a month, Campsite looked promising, but it was for work and Notion bought it and then shut it down, and there are other options, some free and open source ones like Revolt. Revolt is free, open source, very Discord-like, but it's also still very much in development, and anything would have to get past Discord's moat. The fact that we're all real bought into Discord. In some cases, we've even bought cosmetics or had a Nitro subscription. That would make changing away feel bad. You see, the best way to be directly aligned with your users is to make money directly for them, to have them literally pay for your software. We live in a world, though, where people kind of demand free, but then adverts are kind of broadly hated. I feel like across the world, this is coming to a head. Because if people are directly paying for the software they're using, then as a developer, you're focusing on features and the experience of that customer, not necessarily new schemes or expanding your scope, which of course we have seen Discord have to do. Is there a world where Discord does not have to do ads, where it does not have to do this SDK, where actually just off the back of Nitro, it can be what it needs to be for gamers and have good incentives? Is that actually possible? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but in the world of going public, where the line must go up, it's not possible. Because the funding model that leads to Discord even existing in the first place essentially hinges on a big IPO or a big acquisition payday. And that means the development has got to feed into a growth narrative, and that is the recipe for enshittification. I hope Discord gets this right, because what they've built is a genuinely incredible piece of software and an incredible service. It would be sad to see it go wrong. And to learn another story of Valve's algorithm and what we learned about it when we dig through the data, what it gets right, and some problems that it's solving that are actually new problems, watch this video next.
It's weird to think there used to be a time where The Walking Dead was my favorite show on television. It feels very distant now, but I used to be a massive fan of this show. I started watching it around 2013, I think, when season 3 was airing, and I was just obsessed, like a lot of people. It's easy to forget, but in 2013, The Walking Dead was one of the biggest phenomenons in pop culture. Like, this show was a big deal. At that time, you either watched The Walking Dead or Game of Thrones or both, and that's what everybody was talking about. Even in my own circle, it was the biggest thing. We would do giant watch parties every single week, reuniting friends, family members from different generations, parents, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, nephews, cousins, you name it. It was an event every Sunday night, and around season 5, The Walking Dead was the most watched television series in the world. The audience numbers it would pull every week were astronomical, and the show's success seemed impossible to slow down. It was a hit unlike anything we'd seen before. Until it wasn't. In my opinion, and in the opinion of many, The Walking Dead is the perfect A-grade example of a show that widely overstayed its welcome. It's a show that gambled a little too much with its audience and refused to quit while it was ahead, and now, the entirety of The Walking Dead as a franchise feels like a pale shadow of its former self, and more importantly, it feels like a pale shadow at what it could have been. Because, yeah, when you really take a look at it, it's hard to deny that this show had somewhat of a historical downfall. I've been wanting to talk about The Walking Dead on the channel for a very long time, but I always wanted to wait for the show to be over, which is something that felt impossible a couple years ago.
Oh, when? When will it end?
The Walking Dead was known for its tendency to endlessly stretch things out, but last November, after 11 very long seasons, it did, in fact, end. And I've been sitting with some thoughts ever since I watched the series finale, and I want to talk about it because I think the end of The Walking Dead illustrates an issue that has been bugging a lot of people as of late, even internet idiots like me. And I think it's interesting to try and examine what is probably considered to be the greatest fall from grace in television history. But before we do that, I think it's important to take a look back at the earlier years of The Walking Dead on television. The Walking Dead premiered on Halloween night of 2010, and for the uninitiated, the show tells the story of Rick Grimes.
I'm Andrew Lincoln, aka Ricky Dicky Doodah Grimes.
A sheriff's deputy from Georgia who gets shot on duty and wakes up from a coma about a month later. But when he wakes up, he finds out that the world has been destroyed and society has collapsed to a brutal zombie apocalypse. Completely disoriented, terrified, and very much still impaired by the fact that he got bodied by a shotgun, Rick ventures out of the hospital and attempts to navigate the city to try and find his wife Lori and his son Carl. And so the series essentially follows Rick and a group of survivors as they try to stay alive in the apocalypse, facing off against the undead, or worse, other groups of survivors. The show goes through many different incarnations over its run. Most seasons have a total of 16 episodes, split into 2 storylines of 8 episodes each, and the writers try to softly reinvent the show in every half. And that capacity to constantly redefine itself was one of The Walking Dead's biggest strengths, but it ultimately also became one of its biggest problems. See, the one thing I find interesting about the fall of The Walking Dead is that fans have different notions of when the show was officially dead. That's probably because it has a number of low points narratively, but also because it often managed to pick itself up in some capacity. And despite its unimaginably massive downfall, the show did keep somewhat of a cult following until the very end, with most people keeping a very strong attachment to the early days of the series. Season 1 is largely regarded as a fantastic season of television, and I think it holds up pretty well. It has an insanely strong pilot, great characters, great pacing, mostly because season 1 is the shortest season of the show with only 6 episodes. It does an amazing job at setting up the rules rules of the world and introducing the characters and their different dynamics. Aside from Rick, his wife Lori, and his son Carl, we meet a larger cast that becomes integral parts of the show. Glenn, Carol, Shane, Morgan, and of course, the ultimate fan favorite, Daryl Dixon. The season is short but packed with solid writing and great directing, which makes it thrilling and extremely memorable. Season 2, however, is a bit more of a mixed bag for people. While many appreciate its character work and its very skilled displays of tension, the season also faced a lot of criticism for its slow pace and lack of action. And really, it's understandable after the fast-moving Season 1. Most of Season 2 takes place on a farm and deals with the characters trying to find the little girl that went missing. It's a very different dynamic than what Season 1 gave us, and a lot of people describe Season 2 as mainly being boring and uneventful. It's also often pointed out that Season 2 might have had a dip in quality due to the departure of the original showrunner at the end of Season 1. I personally fall somewhere in the middle, but I think it can mostly be chalked up to people needing to get used to the show's tradition of reinventing itself in every new arc. But for me, this season is flawed, but still pretty solid. The tension of the show comes from the characters' interpersonal relationships, and their conflicts hold a lot of weight, especially when it comes to Rick and Shane. Shane's slow descent into madness in Season 2 is still one of my favorite storylines on the show, and the overall character development of the entire cast is just amazing. Long story short, Season 2 has some low points, but when it works, it really works. Season 3 is considered by a number of fans to simply be the best season of The Walking Dead, and it's not difficult to see why. Season 1 and 2 were very different, and when it came to their individual qualities, Season 3 was the best of both worlds. While it managed to improve on its already amazing character work, this season also allowed itself to move a bit more. It's action-packed, fast-paced, the stakes are much higher, it introduces new characters that, for the most part, are awesome, and of course, this is the season that also introduces the show's first real villain, the Governor. He was an insanely menacing psychopath with an eye patch, and people loved him. Season 3 also got praise for the way it explored the psychological aspects of its characters. It's the point where the story shows how this zombie apocalypse is affecting the characters' mental health, and the writers handled it in a way that was incredibly intriguing and, at times, emotional. It's probably not the most realistic depiction of mental health, but to this day, the telephone twist in Season 3 still gives me goosebumps. I'll always remember the first time I saw it. For those who don't know, it's a storyline where Rick gets a phone call from people who are willing to help the group. He talks to them several times, trying to find a way to meet with them. He spends entire days waiting by the phone for them to call, until he realizes in a gut punch of a twist that these people do not exist, that the phone he's using doesn't even work, and that he hallucinated the entire thing. It's an insanely well executed bait and switch that not only crushes the hope of the audience and the characters, but also comes as a crushing revelation to the audience that they really just spent this whole season watching the hero of the show slowly losing his sanity. Long story short, Season 3 is the season that really conquered audiences and catapulted the show at the top of the pop culture pyramid. This is the season when The Walking Dead really became the must-watch television show the internet could not get enough of. Okay, this is where things get a bit tricky, so bear with me. I think the first signs of trouble for The Walking Dead really started to show in Season 4, more specifically in the second half of Season 4. While the first half served as a final chapter to the very popular Governor arc, the rest of the season is the beginning of the Terminus arc, and this is where the show experiences a massive shift in its storytelling that became one of the primary reasons for its eventual downfall. And that is because the Terminus arc marks the beginning of what I like to call The Walking Dead's boomerang storytelling. Let me explain what I mean by that. The second half of Season 4 sees the aftermath of Rick and his group's final showdown against the Governor and his forces. Their sanctuary was destroyed as a result of the battle, and the entire group was separated in the process of escaping the chaos. So, the show now had to follow micro-groups of characters scattered around different parts of the map, trying to find their friends and family members and attempting to survive in the wild. Now, in theory, that's totally fine. You can easily make make that work by separating your episodes in 2 or 3 plot lines. We can jump from plot A to plot B to maybe plot C, and everything would be okay. That's what most TV shows do. But instead of doing that, producer Scott Gimple, who was also the showrunner at the time, opted to do things differently. This is where he started experimenting with boomerang storytelling, aka the idea of dedicating an entire episode to a single character or a single group of characters. Basically, this narrative structure consists of one storyline being the focus of one episode and having a sort of rotation through the season. To simplify, it means episode 1 would focus on storyline 1, episode 2 would focus on storyline 2, episode 3 on storyline 3, episode 4 on storyline 4, and then episode 5 would then circle back around and go back to storyline 1, and then that same cycle would continue until all the storylines converge into one for the finale. So, do I need to explain why that model sucks? This narrative structure was incredibly irritating because it made the continuity of the show become a drag. It undid the momentum of virtually every single storyline in the season, which is only made worse by the fact that it would feature plot threads people would be invested in, but then it would consistently be ruined. Because basically, you would watch an episode about Rick and it would follow him through a storyline that was thrilling and exciting and full of tension, and it would end on a strong cliffhanger, and people would be buzzing about it and talking about it online, and everybody would be excited about the next episode. But then you tune in the following week and the next episode is about another character elsewhere doing other things. So you would wait for the week after, but the next episode would be about yet another secondary character in their own corner of the show doing other things, and so on and so on. So you would watch the very cool episode with Rick and his awesome cliffhanger, but then you would have to wait like a month to see where that goes, because the show then gave you 3 weeks of filler storylines that could have easily been combined into one episode. You basically just had to wait for the main storyline to come back around like a boomerang. It's a terrible narrative choice that slowed the show down and created a really, really frustrating experience for viewers. People hoped it would be short-lived, but it wasn't, because this storytelling model turned out to be a flaw that dragged the show down all the way through the end of season 8. But, to backtrack, while these issues started to appear in season 4, people still absolutely adored the show during that time. It's something that people noticed, but it wasn't a problem yet. I mentioned it earlier, but season 5 is the point where The Walking Dead peaked as a show. The ratings for season 5 were insane. It was the biggest TV show in the world, an absolute pop culture phenomenon like we'd never seen before, and again, every single episode was a massive event. The show seemed unstoppable. And then came Season 6. Season 6 was a defining point for The Walking Dead, a definitive entry that saw a major and extremely important shift happen. Not only because of some narrative choices that didn't quite go right, but also because Season 6 is the point where the fandom started to have some real issues with the show for the very first time. Issues they had a difficult time ignoring. It was the point where the audience was starting to voice their problems with the show very openly. Looking back now, I think Season 6 can reasonably be reframed as the beginning of the end for The Walking Dead. Because while Seasons 4 and 5 made some wonky decisions and experiments that didn't quite land with fans, Season 6 was the definitive point where the show started to make fatal mistakes it would never recover from. For one, by that point, Scott Gimple seemed to be set on the idea of boomerang storytelling storytelling becoming the primary narrative structure for the show. He was using it constantly, and audiences were really starting to feel the effects of it. The show was becoming dull at points, it took forever to get to the point if it ever did, and the exciting and thrilling nature of the story became a rare occurrence, usually kept for premieres and finales, as the rest of the season felt like it was purposefully wasting your time. Over the course of season 6, from the first few episodes, there was a certain frustration that started to grow among the fandom. At first, it was kinda tame because it seemed to be the only major problem people had with the show, but that quickly changed for the worst. To make it short, Scott Gimple and the writers were starting to rely on cheap tricks to mess with the audience and to carry the plot of the show. These cheap tricks came in different forms that seemed to annoy different fans, but it was only a matter of time before they pulled the one cheap trick that would make everybody angry and turn that frustration into real backlash against the show. At the rate they were going, it was only a matter of time before the show made its first fatal mistake. And that fatal mistake inevitably arrived in episode 7 of season 6, where the writers pulled a card that forever changed the audience's perception of the show. And that now infamous fatal mistake was the Glenn fake-out death. Now, it's important to point out for anyone watching this who hasn't seen The Walking Dead that in its early years, one of the biggest elements that made the show so incredibly thrilling is the fact that it established very early on that this was a story where nobody was safe. The Walking Dead was a show where anybody could die. Anybody. They knew that if they wanted the stakes of the show to feel real, the audience needed to feel and see that constant danger. That could only be achieved effectively by killing off main characters in the most brutal and shocking ways. And they succeeded at that. They actually pulled that off really well. It was a big thing. Every time something would go down in the show, the audience would be tense. You would be on the edge of your seat, holding your breath and clenching your butt cheeks because any action sequence meant you were probably about to watch your favorite character get eaten by zombies or get their head chopped off. It was really stressful. And they didn't even keep the big character deaths for big moments like a season finale or something like that. No, sometimes a major character would just die in the middle of a random episode in a gruesome and brutal manner, and then the show had to move on immediately because urgency. We have to move, we have to survive, and that was an element of the story that truly contributed to its high stakes. However, over time, this aspect of the show became less of a necessary narrative device, and instead it slowly turned into a weird and cheap gimmick primarily used for shock value. Character deaths started to feel like they didn't really have a point anymore, and most of the main cast started to develop some pretty thick plot armor, meaning most of the brutal death scenes were given to side characters people didn't really care about. It all became white noise, and 5 or 6 seasons in, the show's extreme gore had lost its impact. People were used to it now, so the gimmick was reduced to shock value that wasn't shocking. So to try and muster up some emotion out of the fans, Scott Gimple and the writers made a very bad decision. A bad decision that was a huge mix of bad writing, cheap shock value, and a lethal dose of boomerang storytelling. Let me walk you through it. In episode 3 of season 6, there is a scene featuring fan favorite Glenn Rhee facing off against a herd of zombies with another character. Long story short, they have to retreat into an alleyway where they get completely surrounded and have for only protection their ability to climb on top of a dumpster, where they find themselves completely stuck. At this point, Nicholas, the other character with Glenn, is completely overwhelmed by the situation, and it seems like there is no immediate solution for them to be saved. So Nicholas completely panics and almost seems to dissociate for a short but tense moment, after which he turns around to face Glenn and thanks him. He then grabs his gun and shoots himself in the head. In his fall to the ground, he accidentally takes Glenn down with him, and they both fall from the dumpster. The scene is then overtaken by sad music as we watch Glenn being brutally ripped apart by the zombies, and then cut to black. Immediately after that scene aired, the audience erupted on social media. It was an absolute whirlwind, but not in the way you'd expect. Where Scott Gimple and the people behind the show expected the scene to be met with the same sense of shock and horror as previous big character deaths, this time they were instead met with a surprising amount of frustration. It turns out that most of the audience could immediately tell that something about Glenn's death scene was off, and it didn't take long for everyone to believe he didn't actually die.
This has got to be a fake out.
Nah, that's not Glenn. That can't be Glenn.
It was fake in the comics.
That's not him. That's Nicholas.
It's Nicholas on top of him. It's not Glenn.
They're eating Nicholas. They've got to be eating Nicholas, right?
And that really made people mad, because resorting to fake out deaths like this to try and get excitement out of the audience was solidifying for a lot of fans that the show was losing steam, and they were angry at the writers for doing something so manipulative and lame in such a big way, which is something they never really had to do before. But despite the frustration, at the time there was no confirmation of anything yet, so people decided to give the show the benefit of the doubt, and everybody agreed to wait for episode 4 to come out the following week to see what happens with Glenn. The problem is, remember, the show was now operating with boomerang storytelling, and that really didn't help anything. The following week, episode 4 came out, and no mention of Glenn. People were really annoyed by that. Episode 5 came out the week after that. Still no Glenn. Now people were getting really pissed off. But another week after that, episode 6 came out, and still no mention of Glenn. I wish I was kidding, but I'm not. It's not until episode 7, a full month later, that the show finally circled back around to Glenn, and we got to find out his fate. One episode before the mid-season finale. And so, after all of this, I will let you imagine the uproar that came from the audience when they found out that all those theories about the fake death scene were right. Glenn didn't die, he was not ripped apart by the walkers, that was the body of Nicholas on top of him. Glenn actually survived by sliding under the dumpster and waiting for 24 hours for the zombies to just leave. And then he got up and just walked away, rendering the entire thing a giant waste of time. This was a very specific turning point for the show, one that fundamentally broke the trust between the audience and the writers, and that was the first fatal mistake the show made. People felt betrayed, they felt like their time was being wasted. The boomerang storytelling was now an unavoidable problem everyone was way too aware of, and the writers beginning to rely on outlandish fake-outs for manufactured drama made people instantly worried about the future of the show. Especially because, spoiler alert, Glenn would end up dying for real just 9 episodes later, but we'll get to that in a minute. After that whole debacle, the show moved on, and the rest of season 6 served as a big piece of narrative build-up for the highly anticipated arrival of The Walking Dead's most notorious big bad, Negan. Negan is introduced in the season 6 finale, as he shows up in one of my favorite scenes in the entire show. He spent the entire second half of the season in the shadows, tricking Rick and his group into being at his mercy as revenge after they killed some of his people, and he completely overpowers them. After the audience heard his name in almost every episode of the season, he finally reveals himself in the last third of the finale. His introduction scene is incredibly tense, and he addresses the group for the first time in an 11-minute monologue that is performed brilliantly by Jeffrey Dean Morgan.
You're Rick, right? I'm Negan. And I do not appreciate you killing my men. Also, when I sent my people to kill your people for killing my people, you killed more of my people. Not cool. I don't want to kill you people. Just want to make that clear from the get-go. I want you to work for me. You can't do that if you're dead, now can you? All right, listen. Don't any of you do that again. I will shut that shit down, no exceptions. First one's free. It's an emotional moment. I get it.
Honestly, this scene is so good, sometimes I just go on YouTube to watch it randomly. It's a masterclass of tension, it's incredibly well acted, but while Negan's arrival is hands down one of my favorite scenes in the entire show, it is also the scene that made millions of people rage quit on The Walking Dead, because the ending of the season turned out to be the show's second fatal mistake. Now, whether you've seen the show or not, you've probably heard about the absolute fucking scandal created by what is essentially considered to be the worst cliffhanger in television history. It made people so mad that it literally broke the internet. It was completely insane. Seriously, the backlash got so bad that like Scott Gimple had to address it to the press, actors tried to defend the decision in interviews, people were screaming for Scott Gimple to be fired, they denounced the show's manipulative antics. It was a fucking shit show. So what was the cliffhanger? Well, after Negan finishes his incredible monologue, he lets Rick and the gang know that he will punish their arrogance by brutally murdering one person in the group with his baseball bat. He wants to make everybody watch as he bashes someone's head in as violently as he can. Now, it's a very famous scene from the comics the show is adapted from, and people were really looking forward to seeing it adapted, because there were a lot of questions about whether the show was going to pick the same victim as the comics, or instead opt for killing off another character to keep the surprise. As the finale approached, the people behind the show promised a major death. They told people they would be shocked when they see who dies, so everybody tuned in. Scott Gimple was hyping the ending so much. Everyone was completely intrigued by the arrival of this Negan guy. The excitement was at a peak, and then Negan shows up. He announces he's gonna kill someone, he lifts his bat and smashes it down. You hear people screaming, and then it cuts to black. Yeah, that's not a joke. After all this build-up, after all the promise and the hype, the season 6 finale ends without actually showing you who Negan kills. He hits the camera and then it cuts to black. It's a cheap and infuriating cliffhanger that made people fucking furious, and understandably so, because people now had to wait almost 7 months just to see who died. The backlash the show got was so loud, it was honestly impressive. It proved to be a breaking point for many viewers though, and this is the first big moment that became a last straw for a huge part of the fandom that quit the show right then and there. And then came Season 7. The first episode of Season 7 is considered by many to be one of the best episodes of the show, if not the best episode, which obviously after all the backlash of the Season 6 finale during its entire hiatus, they knew this premiere had to be a fucking banger. And as promised, we do end up finding out in this premiere who Negan killed. It was Abraham and Glenn, by the way. The episode is thrilling, brutal, emotional. It makes Negan even more terrifying than he was in the Season 6 finale. And honestly, aside from some criticism over how graphic this episode was, the Season 7 premiere was so good and got so many people talking about it, some people were convinced the show would succeed at getting the fans' trust back. And these people were wrong. I'm gonna make this short. Season 7 and 8 ruined the show, plain and simple. After the first episode of Season 7, the show just crashes in terms of quality. It's an absolute freefall that to this day I do not understand. It's almost hard to believe the nosedive the show goes on during this time. I still have trouble believing it's real, even though I watched all of it. Basically, to give you a brief overview, Season 7 and 8 are just 31 episodes of boomerang storytelling where nothing happens. It is all about the war against Negan, which should have been the most bonkers storyline in the entire show, especially after that crazy setup, but it is just so dull. It's an endless back and forth of useless bullshit and filler episodes that go on and on and on, and the show just never gets to the point. It seemed like the writer's plan with the story just became, how do we waste as much time as possible to keep dragging this on so we can milk more seasons out of the show. It's uninteresting, it's boring as fuck, it feels tired as hell, and in the process of ruining the story, they also ruin all of the characters one by one. Negan is given one of the most badass introductions in the history of television, but despite Jeffrey Dean Morgan never giving a bad performance in this role, the character ends up becoming an annoying villain that feels boring and mishandled because he just never gets to the point.
I'm Negan. And I fed him spaghetti.
Rick is completely directionless as a character now. Daryl, who is by far the most popular character on the show, becomes a background character that hardly ever speaks. He literally spends 2 seasons just grunting at people and barely says anything. And that's not just me saying it, by the way. Norman Reedus himself acknowledged it afterwards.
And for the last couple seasons, Daryl has been speaking in a series of grunts and snarls, and in this episode...
You're right.
Basically, over the last few seasons, the show had just become a repetitive drag that kept itself going by taking a couple of major storylines and recycling them over and over and over again, and seasons 7 and 8 were the worst of it. It was a disaster. These 2 seasons are just shameful. They're so bad, it's almost insulting. And enough was enough for the audience, because season 7 is the point where The Walking Dead started losing viewers for the first time. And it was noticeable because they were losing viewers fast. The ratings were dropping at an alarming rate, and that continued through season 8.
Hey, that rhymes.
Fan communities online just dwindled away. Some of them got really angry and started to just rant about the show every week until they just stopped covering it. It was just really sad. The show, that at one point easily got between 13 and 17 million live viewers every single week, which was just gigantic, by the way, was now dropping below the 10 million line regularly, and that drop showed no sign of stopping. And it never did stop, by the way. The show never recovered from season 7 and 8, especially not after they made their third and final fatal mistake. Because in the mid-season finale of season 8, the writers randomly decided to kill off Carl Grimes, Rick's son.
Oh, no.
There was a whole lot of drama around it behind the scenes because allegedly Chandler Riggs, who played Carl, was told that he was going to stay on the show for a really long time, and he was planning a lot of stuff in his life to go according to that, and then they just kind of killed him off randomly very fast after he renewed his contract. But before people even found out about that, there was already just outrage everywhere.
No?
After 23 episodes of complete boredom and mediocrity, Carl's death comes out of nowhere and in a way that feels incredibly unearned. And it was just the ultimate breaking point for the show. Carl's death proved to be the last straw for a lot of people. Everyone was so done with The Walking Dead's bullshit. Scott Gimple's name became synonymous with the show's downfall. Everybody accepted that the show's glory days were long gone, and so fans quit on the show by the millions. It literally got to the point where the cast of the show was sent on a whole press tour early in season 9 to literally beg people not to give up on the show. Season 9 also saw Scott Gimple stepping down as showrunner to handle larger projects within the franchise, and longtime writer of the series, Angela Kang, coming in to take over as the new boss. After the complete disasters that were the last 2 seasons, AMC and literally everyone involved in the show knew there needed to be a change, and Angela was determined to bring the show back to its former glory. And you know what? Against all odds, she succeeded. Angela Kang actually fixed the show. Season 9 is one of the best seasons of The Walking Dead. It is one of the best return to forms I've ever seen on television, and Angela takes 100% of the credit for that. And she had to work with a lot of bullshit to manage to make it this good. She had to deal with the aftermath of the worst 2 seasons, and she also had to deal with Andrew Lincoln leaving the show. We'll talk about his departure more in a little bit, but him leaving meant Angela was now tasked with reinventing the show without its protagonist. It should have been a losing battle from the get-go, but she somehow managed to do it. She made The Walking Dead great again. But it didn't matter. The show actually got better, yes, but it was too little too late. Despite remaining fans and critics being back on the show's side and praising it again, Walking Dead spent the entirety of season 9 bleeding viewers left and right. Despite the grand return to form, they just couldn't make the show recover from the major mistakes of the last 3 seasons. Every single week saw new ratings low for the show up until its eventual finale, and it continued in the seasons that followed. People just left the show in droves. And for the record, I was one of those people too. Despite the fact that I loved season 9 and was super impressed by how Angela Kang reinvented the show, I somehow couldn't find the motivation to watch season 10. I did start the season when it came out, but 2 episodes in, literally on the 2nd week, something in my brain just went, I'm tired of this, and I just never went back to the show. I officially gave up on The Walking Dead 2 episodes into season 10. And I think it's because, yes, like I said, it was too little too late, but it's also because the sense of community around the show was completely gone by that point. It was true for the fandom as a whole, and it was also true for me individually. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned how my people and I used to watch the show in massive groups, and we had a watch party every week with friends and family members around some good food, and then whoever wasn't able to make it would call after the episode, and we would all talk about it and stuff, and it was a hype that felt amazing and fun and fresh. But by the time season 10 rolled around, I was the only person in my entire extended circle that was still watching the show. And that's not hyperbole, by the way. When I tell you I was the only one, I mean that. I did not know a single person who was still watching the show. All of my friends had stopped watching, my friends' friends stopped watching, my girlfriend had grown to hate the show, my brother quit when Carl died in season 8, and that was his favorite show of all time, so you can imagine. There wasn't a single soul left in my life that was still watching the show, and watching by myself just did not hit the same. And so the mix of all these elements made me get bored of the show in a way that made it unwatchable for me. And I don't think I was the only one in that boat, because The Walking Dead's rapid decline never really slowed down. Remember when I said that at its peak, The Walking Dead could pull up to 17 million live viewers? Yeah, well, by season 11, the show was only pulling about 1 million viewers per episode. Ouch. I don't know if you realize how insane that is. That's not a small little drop that you can ignore. By season 11, the show had lost about 94% of its viewership. How much? 94%. That is just brutal. There's no way you can look at that and go, oh, that's fine. No, that's catastrophic. When I told you the show had a historical downfall, I wasn't exaggerating. The series finale, the end of this 12-year journey that meant so much to so many people, only pulled about 2 million viewers. And to this day, almost 6 months after the finale, some old fans of the show are not even aware that The Walking Dead ended last year. And oh, speaking of the devil, let's talk about the very reason I made this video. Let's talk about the ending. I hate the ending of The Walking Dead. I can't stand it. Watching it made me so frustrated and so sad at the same time. Now, to reiterate, yes, I did stop watching the show 2 episodes into season 10, and I never finished that season, and I never watched the first half of season 11. Although, from what I've seen online, the general consensus is that season 10 starts really strong and gets really dull, especially with a handful of episodes that were shot during COVID and that were not initially planned. So, make of that what you will. I eventually returned to the show to watch the last 4 episodes, and the finale left me incredibly irritated. But why? Why is the ending of The Walking Dead so frustrating? Why is it so bad? After all, it's not an ending that is as outwardly insulting and soul-shattering as other shows. It's not the finale of Game of Thrones or Lost, Pretty Little Liars, How I Met Your Mother, Dexter, or hell, even The Sopranos. But while it's easy to understand why the finales of these shows created such a massive shitstorm in pop culture, I think the ending of The Walking Dead is a failure for a reason that is very different from all the other ones, at least to me. Because sure, the finale itself as an episode is not as bad as all the other ones I just mentioned. If anything, it's just very underwhelming, but I somehow found it to be way more frustrating. And the reason for that is very simple. The ending of The Walking Dead is not a real ending. The show ends, yes, but the story doesn't. The Walking Dead finale is not a true swan song. It's a jumping pad used to expand on the franchise in AMC's continual and desperate attempts at creating their Walking Dead universe. The characters that we loved and cherished don't actually complete arcs that come full circle or allows them to find closure. No, they're just being sent off to different spin-off series in different parts of the world. Daryl Dixon, who essentially became the protagonist after Rick's departure, will somehow find himself in Paris in a new show of his own that is currently shooting. Maggie and Negan are apparently getting a spin-off titled The Walking Dead Dead City. That's a terrible title, by the way. That will be set in New York, and there are like 3 or 4 other series in the works. Rick Grimes comes back in the finale for the first time since his departure at the beginning of season 9, but he's not really coming back for the finale. It's just a teaser for his spin-off with Michonne that's coming out later next year. And even that is an example of how shady and disrespectful of the audience AMC can be. In case you don't know, for the quick backstory, Andrew Lincoln, who plays Rick Grimes, wanted to leave the show at the end of season 8. He wasn't enjoying it as much, which is understandable because seasons 7 and 8 were a very low point for the show. His contract was up at the end of season 8, and he also got tired of living so far away from his wife and kids. The show shot in Georgia, but Andrew Lincoln is British and his family lived in England. So, at the end of season 8, he was gonna leave. There was a whole setup for his exit with the now infamous flash forward from the beginning of season 8 showing Rick appearing to be dying next to a tree, which was confirmed by Andrew Lincoln himself to be a setup for the end of Rick's story because he initially asked for the writers to kill him off. Except AMC somehow convinced him to stay for another 5 episodes in season 9 so they can give him a proper send-off. So the flash forward was later retconned and turned out to be somewhat of a fake out, and now the end of Rick's story was the primary focus of the first part of the following season. It's important to note that the whole marketing campaign for season 9 was about Rick's final episodes. That's all they talked about. It was in trailers, it was on the posters. Andrew Lincoln did a bunch of events and interviews saying goodbye to the fans and talking about how much this character and this show meant to him. And people were really sad to see him go, me included. This was kind of a big deal. I mean, since day one, The Walking Dead had been the story of Rick Grimes, so people were sad to know the story was going to be moving past him, but were still curious to see how things would end for him, especially after all the public farewells they'd seen from Andrew and AMC. It was difficult to accept, but everyone came to terms with it and was ready to say goodbye. But then, his final episode came out, and Rick's exit turned out to be another bizarre fake fake-out death ending with a cliffhanger that left everybody really confused, only for Scott Gimple to immediately announce on the Talking Dead after show that this entire thing was essentially another big trick. This wasn't the big farewell we had been conditioned to accept. Rick wasn't actually going away forever, he was just being sent off to a spin-off Rick Grimes movie trilogy. And the first 5 episodes of season 9 were essentially a build-up to that announcement. This reveal was met with a lot of backlash, frustration, and a lack of excitement that took Scott Gimple and AMC a bit by surprise. This was one too many times that the audience had been tricked by the people behind the show in a very unpleasant way. They tried to build some hype for the Rick Grimes movies, but they never really got the excitement they were looking for. I think this might have caused them to panic a bit behind the scenes, because then those Rick Grimes movies got stuck in development hell for like 4 years, a period that was only made worse by the pandemic. They never really figured out what they wanted those movies to be, which was very apparent when interviews of Scott or creator Robert Kirkman led to questions about the project. When asked about updates on the Rick films years after their announcement, they still seemed to be in early stages of the process with no sign of a production start, and they always gave very vague and confused answers that brought nothing concrete to the table. Long story short, the movies never got off the ground for the entire 4 years that followed their announcement. 4 years after which these movies were scrapped and reworked into a Rick and Michonne TV spin-off that's now slated to come out in 2024. And that's the only reason why Rick and Michonne reappear in the series finale of the original show. Not to actually have anything to do with the story ending, because it's not ending, but just to remind the audience that their spin-off is on the way. And that's what frustrates me so much. The Walking Dead finale is not a finale, it's just a transition point. It's a scam. It makes you feel like the show tricked you for 12 years. People invested so much into this show, The Walking Dead had a very loyal audience, but Scott Gimple and AMC always chose to take advantage of that with little to no shame. They never tried to do anything for the audience, they only ever tried to manipulate them or trick them into watching more. They're so desperate to make this franchise a thing, they're ready to pull anything to achieve it, and it's really unfortunate to see. And it's also not like it's really been working. AMC has been trying to kickstart a Walking Dead universe for the better part of a decade now, and it's never truly worked out for them. Fear the Walking Dead, the first spin-off the show ever had, is the most successful venture the franchise has had aside from the original show. It's about to end with its 7th season, I think, and everything I hear about it is negative. It seems like people have not liked this show in a really long time, and people who watch it seem to be just as annoyed with it as people were with the original show in season 7 and 8. I personally gave up on Fear the Walking Dead about halfway through its 2nd season, so I'm not really concerned here, but I don't know anyone who watches this show anymore, and maybe that's why it's ending. Then there is The Walking Dead World Beyond, a teen drama take on the zombie apocalypse that was just really bad. Nobody really watched it. It ended after 2 seasons, and the only relevant moments it had were one scene that vaguely mentioned Rick Grimes and the post-credit scene of the series finale that teases a theory that the apocalypse might have started in France. And it also shows the possibility of more variant zombies that are more aggressive and that can run and hit, which is something that probably will play out in some way in the Daryl show because it takes place in Paris. But all in all, World Beyond was an insanely forgettable show that never really found an audience. It disappeared as quickly as it arrived. And finally, last year, we had Tales of the Walking Dead, an anthology spin-off series that came and went so fast that most people are not aware that this show even exists. It was an underwhelming mess that didn't really know what to do with its vast realm of possibilities. It went largely unnoticed, and the few people who did watch it didn't like it all that much. much. And I think this show especially is a great vision of the state of the franchise right now. For what seems like an entire decade, the Walking Dead franchise has been in this perpetual state of throwing everything at the wall as it desperately hopes that something sticks. And unfortunately for them, none of it has really been working out the way they want. I mean, excuse the shitty pun, but The Walking Dead has been in a state of decay for like 5 or 6 years now. Actually, I don't apologize for that pun, I stand by it. And it looks like AMC is just reaching and reaching to try and bring the franchise back to its 2015-ish glory. But man, that's long gone. The fact that they're ready to ruin all of their iconic characters for the sake of milking this franchise with no end in sight is really sad. I'm sure I'll get curious and check out the Daryl show and the Rick and Michonne show. I don't know if I'm gonna stick with them, but right now I don't see any hype for any of those spin-offs, and some of them are coming out this year. That's kind of crazy when you think about it. I don't know, it just feels so disappointing to invest over a decade into a show that never wanted to end, only to then bait the small amount of people that remain faithful to the show into watching other stuff if they want a definitive ending that is not even guaranteed. I really wanted the final season to prove me wrong for quitting on the show in season 10, to prove to everyone who quit on the show along the way that sticking with it would have been worth it, but I feel like it achieved the opposite. It proved everyone right. It proved to me, and to the 94% of the colossal audience that quit, that being so invested into this story and these characters is not worth it. I've talked about it at length on the channel, but I'm always wary of stories that make it very clear they have no end in sight, and that's what The Walking Dead is now. It's a story that keeps going just for the sake of it, and more often than not, these stories keep going until nobody wants to watch them anymore, and then it ends in a bit of a dud that, by default, cannot be satisfying to anyone. And it's a sad fate for a show that once was a cultural phenomenon of a scale we had never really seen before. In a meta way, you could say that the franchise itself is the real Walking Dead. Okay, that wasn't my best joke, but please subscribe. There's almost 500,000 of us in here. Look, I don't know what The Walking Dead will evolve into. I genuinely don't. But I doubt this franchise will ever become the popular cinematic universe the creators desperately want it to be. If it ever had the potential to, I think that ship sailed like 7 or 8 years ago at the very least. At the end of the day, it's a show that was ruined by the greed of the people making it. People who chose a corporate route of banking on never-ending build-up to milk this franchise for everything it has. They turned it into this long, overly dragged-out story that feels like it's constantly building towards something that never happens. I will always remember the early seasons fondly, not only for what they were, but for all the moments it brought me and my friends and family as we all experienced it together. But every time I look at it, just like a lot of people out there, I cannot help but see what The Walking Dead really is. The greatest fall from grace in television history. Ding dong, bitches, it's that time of the year. Welcome back to the big roundup, friends, that time at the end of each year where we take a look back at the shows that came out in the last 12 months. I can't believe another year has passed already. It feels like I did the last top 10s like 4 months ago, but nope, time do be flying, and it's already time to do another one. And there is a lot to say about this year. 2024 was a very strange year in television, full of things I did not expect, both on the side of pleasant surprises and on the side of crippling disappointments. Was it a good year for TV like 2023 was? I don't know, actually. Generally speaking, I don't have as easy of a time saying this was a great year for TV. But that doesn't mean we didn't have a number of fantastic shows coming out this year. 2024 had some epic, beautiful, genre-defining gems that absolutely deserve to be celebrated, and that is what we are about to take a look at. Making the top 10 this year was much easier for me because I feel like there weren't as many great shows as last year, and a lot of the shows I expected to be great, a lot of the shows I expected to be on this top 10, ended up disappointing me, which narrowed down the list fairly easily. And naturally, there were a lot of really bad shows this year as well. That's going to be the topic of the next video. But the shows that did slapped really fucking hard, and it filled my little heart with joy. I watched as many of them as was humanly possible, and now it's time to rank them. So grab yourself a hot chocolate, cozy up in your favorite spot, and together, let's take a look at the 10 best TV shows of 2024. Starting with number 10, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. To kick off this list, we have a show I was feeling a little nervous. But if you know, you know. But if you know, you know. It's crazy to think that it's been an entire decade since the end of How I Met Your Mother. 10 years to conclude a show that started almost 20 years ago. It honestly doesn't feel like it's been that long. Time really does fly. Or I'm just getting old, I don't know, man. I was a big fan of How I Met Your Mother when I was a teenager, as were a lot of people. It was a hit show by every definition of the term. The hype around this series was no joke. From its very first season to its last, How I Met Your Mother had pop culture in a chokehold. Even if you weren't watching it, you just could not escape it. It was everywhere. As we all know, though, this show kinda dropped the ball. They kinda messed up at the end. If you go around the internet and encounter any top 10 list of the worst series finales of all time, I'm willing to bet that every single one of them will mention the series finale of How I Met Your Mother. Very few shows have managed to rival the absolute scandal caused by that finale. It was kinda crazy. And I can say, as someone who was watching the show week to week for years, experiencing the ending along with the rest of the world was just wild. Like, we all love to talk about bad TV endings, like Game of Thrones, Dexter, or Pretty Little Liars, which are all terrible, don't get me wrong, but I don't think people truly remember just how loud the anger was when How I Met Your Mother ended. Because at the time it did, in 2014, we had never really seen something like that happen. But now it's been a decade, and I haven't taken a look at the show's final season in years. And while How I Met Your Mother has remained extremely relevant online over the years, I feel like most people avoid talking about the ending. It's kind of an unspoken rule of the internet. We just collectively chose to forget about it. So recently, I started getting really curious to see how the ending of the show has aged. Like, I started to wonder how I would feel about the ending now with a completely different lens. I mean, who knows? Maybe it wasn't as bad as we thought it was back then. Maybe the outrage wasn't entirely justified, or maybe it was. Maybe, in retrospect, we were too hard on it? I don't know, it piqued my curiosity. 10 years is a long enough time, and that was starting to take over my brain, so I finally decided to sit down and rewatch the ending of the show. It had been a pretty long time, so there are a lot of details I didn't remember clearly, which made it very interesting to re-explore. So today, friends, we're going to take a look back at How I Met Your Mother's ending 10 years later. But before we get into it, lately I've very much been into photography. It's a very fun and creative hobby that I picked up a few months ago that helps me quiet my brain when things are hectic, and I'm always looking for ways to improve my skills with it. So imagine my surprise when I found out recently that one of my favorite photographers and YouTubers, Jessica Kabaisi, has made a DSLR photography class that is part of a learning path on Skillshare, the sponsor of today's video. Oh yeah. Skillshare is a massive online community where you can learn pretty much anything you want. Really, anything. It is basically an infinite pool of knowledge. There are literally thousands of fascinating classes for curious and creative people about pretty much anything you would like to explore or any goal you would like to reach. From illustration and filmmaking to web design, just about anything you can think of, they have a class for it ready to help you learn. And not only do they help you discover new passions, they also help you go deeper with your knowledge thanks to curated, sequential class collections called learning paths, designed to help you master a specific skill or hobby. They give you a very clear direction through the topic you decide to learn about and save you time from searching because they're made to have a seamless flow and it makes everything very easy. Like this learning path curated for DSLR photography, with classes by Justin Bridges or Jessica Kabaisi, who I adore, and to put it simply, it has been the perfect starting point I've been looking for to get into it. Honestly, no goal is too small with Skillshare. You can find a class to learn anything. And you know what? You guys are in luck, because the first 500 people to use the link in the description will be able to get a month free trial of Skillshare. You can go and explore the platform and learn about anything you would like for an entire month for free. Anything you want, the whole thing will be at your disposal. So this is your chance to go and explore any topic you're curious about. So check out the link in my description, join Skillshare, and start learning. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. You guys are the best. And let's get back to the video. So, for the uninitiated, How I Met Your Mother is the story of Ted Mosby, a young and ambitious architect living in New York City with his two best friends from college and newly engaged couple, Marshall and Lily. The story is actually told from the perspective of Ted 25 years in the future. The show is framed around the scenario of him sitting his future children down to tell them the story of how he met their mother. And so he narrates the story of his life and experiences, retracing all the major and minor events that led him to meeting the love of his life throughout an entire decade. We witness the craziest stories Ted lived alongside Marshall and Lily, but also with his strange friend Barney, a methodical and unethical womanizer who leads him to meet Robin, a Canadian journalist who drastically changes the course of Ted's life. On the surface, How I Met Your Mother is sort of framed as a serialized romantic comedy, but the reality is, this is a show about life. We're following a group of friends as they experience life. The joys, the sorrows, the extraordinary and the mundane. The realities of being an adult. We see them fall in love, we see them heartbroken, we watch them as they are faced with the fear of starting a new job, having issues when getting a new apartment, being nervous on a first date, struggling with your career path, the pain of losing a parent, the difficulties of becoming a parent, the epic highs and lows of high school football. No, wrong show. It's a